My fiancée said her boss was like family. I dropped by his house unexpectedly, and she opened the door in a towel. I've never been the jealous type. Not the kind to scroll through a partner's phone or show up unannounced. I used to think that kind of behavior belonged to people who didn't trust themselves, not their partners. But I guess it's easy to talk about trust when you haven't had it twisted into a weapon against you. Marina and I had been together for almost 4 years. I thought we were solid, stable, maybe even boring, but in a comfortable way. She worked as an assistant for a big construction firm, while I handled project coordination for a logistics company. Our routines overlapped perfectly. Morning coffee together, a quick goodbye kiss, and separate drives to work. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. Or at least, that's what I thought before her job started consuming everything. It began when she couldn't stop mentioning her boss, Gregson Vale. The way she talked about him made him sound like some kind of visionary. According to her, he was brilliant, misunderstood, and like family. She said that phrase a lot, like family. It stuck with me. I'd hear it every time she explained why she had to stay late or why he texted her after midnight. I told myself not to overthink it. She was ambitious, and Gregson was just another ladder she needed to climb. Still, the late nights piled up. The dinners she missed. The weekend plans she canceled because of urgent client meetings. She started dressing differently, too. More polished, more deliberate. Perfume I hadn't bought her. Makeup that looked like it took an hour instead of 10 minutes. It wasn't the kind of change that happens when someone's improving themselves. It was the kind that happens when someone wants to impress someone new. One night, I woke up to her phone buzzing. She was in the shower, and a message flashed across the screen. Still awake? Missed your voice today. My chest went tight. The contact name wasn't saved, just a number. She came out a minute later, saw me looking, and grabbed the phone. Said it was from a coworker joking around. Her voice was calm, practiced. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But from that night on, something started eating at me. The following week, she mentioned a work retreat. She said she'd have to stay overnight near the coast because of a client event. It wasn't unusual for her to travel, but something in her tone felt off. Too casual, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. She promised she'd call once she got there. That call never came. I waited until midnight before sending a text. She replied around 3 in the morning. All good. Just exhausted. Long day. No punctuation, no warmth. Just sterile words. The next morning, she didn't answer when I called. I went to work anyway, but my mind wasn't there. Around lunchtime, I looked up her company's Instagram page. They'd posted a story from the event. A glimpse of a fancy villa with a caption about our team enjoying a successful partnership. I paused the video on a frame that showed her standing next to Gregson, both holding wine glasses, the ocean behind them. I recognized the view immediately. I'd seen it in a magazine piece about Gregson's architectural masterpiece on the coast. The same patio, the same glass walls. That's when my stomach dropped. She wasn't at a hotel. She was at his house. For hours, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe other employees were there. But when evening came, I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and started driving. It was a 2-hour trip. The whole way there, I rehearsed what I'd say if I was wrong. Maybe I'd laugh about it. Maybe I'd even apologize. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't have to. The road curved along the water before opening up to a private driveway lined with soft lights. Her blue sedan was parked next to Gregson's black Mercedes. My heart started pounding in a slow, steady rhythm. Not from anger, not yet, just disbelief. I walked up to the gate. The villa looked even larger in person, every window glowing with warm light. I rang the bell. For a long moment, there was no sound except the ocean behind me. Then the door opened. Marina stood there, wrapped in a towel. Her hair was damp, her eyes wide. For a second, I thought she might faint. Behind her, I heard music playing and the low hum of a man's voice. Gregson's voice. She froze. I didn't say a word. I just stepped forward and looked past her. There were 2 glasses of wine on the counter, half empty. A suit jacket hung carelessly over the back of a chair. The air smelled like her perfume mixed with someone else's cologne. Gregson appeared from the hallway, bare-chested, holding a glass. He stopped mid-step when he saw me. His expression wasn't guilt. It was irritation, like I'd interrupted something inconvenient. I still didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything I needed to know was already laid out in front of me. My eyes landed on Marina's purse sitting on a side table. It was open. I reached inside and found the small velvet ring box I'd given her when I proposed. The ring was inside. She'd taken it off, maybe hours ago, maybe days. I set it down on the counter beside Gregson's drink and walked out. No shouting. No crying. Just a door closing behind me. The drive back felt endless. My thoughts ran in loops, circling the same question. How long had it been going on? There were too many signs I'd ignored. The late-night messages, The overnight meetings, the sudden new wardrobe. It wasn't a mistake. It was a slow, deliberate detachment disguised as career growth. When I got home, I packed her things into boxes. I didn't destroy anything. I just folded her clothes neatly, placed them by the door, and sat on the couch, staring at nothing for a long time. The sun was rising by the time my phone buzzed. It was her. The message said she needed to explain. I didn't open it. Around noon, I checked our shared online calendar. Every single trip she'd claimed to take in the last 6 months matched Gregson's schedule. Every conference, every meeting. She hadn't been working late. She'd been building a second life. That realization didn't ignite rage. It just hollowed everything out. The silence in the apartment suddenly made sense. The way she'd avoided eye contact, the polite tone, the distant smile. She'd been phasing me out long before I noticed. That evening, I changed the locks. I sent a short email to her office saying she could pick up her things when she was ready. I didn't mention what I'd seen. I didn't accuse her of anything. The truth didn't need my help anymore. As I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on, I thought about how strange it was that betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, disguised as exhaustion, as career pressure, as harmless admiration. You don't see it until it's standing in front of you in a towel, pretending to be surprised. I told myself that was the end of it, that I could move on and start fresh. But I didn't know then that what happened at that villa was only the beginning. That Marina and her, like family boss, had tangled themselves into something much darker, something that would eventually drag both of them down far deeper than either could imagine. The morning after that night at Gregson's villa, I woke up to a silence that felt too heavy to belong in the same apartment. Marina's things were still boxed by the door. I kept expecting a knock or a message explaining everything, but when it came, it wasn't what I expected. She texted that she wanted to talk, that I misunderstood. It was almost funny, the kind of line people use when they get caught in the middle of their own lie. I ignored her at first, but by the afternoon she showed up outside my building. She didn't look like the person I'd seen the night before. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her clothes professional, makeup subtle. She stood there holding a folder like she was walking into a meeting. Her first words were about how I shouldn't have come there, that it looked worse than it was. She said Gregson was like family, the same tired phrase that had turned sour in my head. I didn't argue. I told her I'd seen enough to make my own conclusions. She tried another tactic, claimed she was just helping him through a personal issue, that I'd embarrassed her by showing up unannounced. Every sentence was rehearsed, emotionally hollow. When she realized she wasn't getting sympathy, her tone shifted. Suddenly she was the victim, saying I'd always been too suspicious, too controlling. It was absurd, but I let her talk. The less I said, the more she revealed. 2 days later, I got a call from HR at her company. The woman on the line was polite but cautious. She said there had been concerns raised about me contacting employees at the office, and that they preferred I cease any communication with company personnel. I hadn't contacted anyone. The only person I'd emailed was Marina, telling her she could collect her belongings. When I asked what exactly I was being accused of, the woman wouldn't elaborate. "We can't disclose internal matters," she said. That's when it hit me. Marina had filed something first. I went down to her company's building myself, trying to get a meeting with someone from HR. The front desk said my name was flagged. Apparently, Marina had told them I was harassing her after a difficult breakup. It was surreal hearing that word come out of a stranger's mouth, breakup, like the engagement hadn't even existed. As I left the building, one of her co-workers, a quiet guy named Alan I'd met once at a party, followed me out to the parking lot. He looked nervous, checking over his shoulder before speaking. He told me, in a low voice, that everyone at the office already knew about Marina and Gregson. They weren't hiding it well. She bragged that he took care of her better than I ever could, that she was set for life. HR wasn't protecting her, they were protecting him. Gregson was high up, almost untouchable, and she'd attached herself to him like an insurance policy. That night, I sat down and opened my laptop. I wasn't interested in revenge, not yet. I just wanted the truth laid out somewhere other than in my head. I started gathering what I already had: the messages, the photos, the receipts. Credit card statements showed restaurant bills charged to her joint account near Gregson's property on weekends she'd claimed to be working late. I found emails with flight confirmations that didn't match her official travel schedule. And on her old laptop, which she'd left behind, I found a shared folder labeled contracts. Inside were photos of her at the villa, smiling beside Gregson, with his hand on her waist. I didn't know what to do with it all. Part of me wanted to drop it off at HR, force them to see how deeply they'd been played. But something told me that wouldn't do much. People like Gregson didn't get punished by companies. They got protected by them. Then I thought about his wife, Caroline Vale. I remembered seeing her once at a company event, calm, polished, The kind of woman who didn't raise her voice because she didn't need to. Her presence alone did the work. It took me a few tries to find her contact information. Eventually, I located a public email linked to a charity foundation she ran. I wrote a short message. I didn't rant or accuse anyone. I just said there were things she deserved to know. I attached 3 photos and 1 screenshot. Nothing explicit, just enough to confirm what had been happening. An hour later, she replied. Her message was short. I already know, but I want him to think I don't. That single line froze me. There was no anger, no disbelief, just quiet strategy. She asked if I would be willing to meet discreetly, somewhere public. I agreed. We met 2 days later at a small cafe near the downtown district. She arrived on time, composed, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast. When she sat down, she thanked me for the information and said she'd been building her own case for months. She knew about Gregson's affairs, but Marina was the first one he'd been careless enough to bring into their home. Caroline said she wanted to handle this her way. She didn't ask me to stay out of it, but she didn't want me doing anything rash either. She said she was planning a formal announcement at a charity gala in 2 weeks, something public, where Gregson couldn't control the narrative. I asked why she was involving me, and she smiled slightly. Because you've already lost everything he took from you, she said. That makes you useful. I didn't know how to respond to that, but she wasn't wrong. In the days leading up to the gala, Marina tried reaching me again. She called from a new number, left voicemails about how things got complicated, and that she'd made mistakes. The tone was different now, softer, almost desperate. She even left a note at my building saying she was being pressured and that Gregson was going through a rough time. None of it mattered anymore. I could hear the rehearsed guilt in her words. A week later, Caroline sent me an encrypted email with a short list of instructions. She asked for copies of everything I had, timestamped proof, photos, any connection between Marina and Gregson that tied back to company resources. It was clear she planned to expose not just the affair, but the misuse of funds tied to it. For the first time since that night at the villa, I felt something like control. Not satisfaction, that was still far away, but direction. I met Caroline again, this time in a quiet hotel lobby where she was organizing documents with her attorney. She thanked me for what I'd provided and mentioned that Gregson had no idea she was preparing anything. He still thought he was safe. As I left that meeting, I finally understood why she hadn't confronted him sooner. She wasn't driven by emotion. She was driven by precision. And I realized that kind of quiet calculation was the one thing Marina had never learned. I went home that evening and poured a drink, feeling the strange calm that follows after chaos starts making sense. The game had shifted. It wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about consequences, and for once, I wasn't the one running from them. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing outside a downtown ballroom with my tie pulled too tight and my mind running through every possible outcome of that night. Caroline had sent the invitation in a plain envelope, no return address, just a handwritten note. Attend quietly. You'll want to see this. Inside, the air smelled of perfume, wine, and ambition. The gala was a charity dinner hosted by the Vale Foundation, a yearly event meant to show how benevolent Gregson was. The irony of that didn't escape me. He'd built an image of a man who could do no wrong, the kind of leader people toasted with admiration. Caroline moved through the room like a conductor guiding an orchestra, calm, graceful. No one could guess what she was about to unleash. I kept my distance, pretending to be another anonymous donor. She'd told me not to speak to anyone, not to draw attention, and not to react when things started happening. Gregson arrived fashionably late, Marina beside him. The sight of them together hit me harder than I'd expected. She looked almost unrecognizable from the woman I'd once proposed to. Expensive dress, diamond earrings, the air of someone who thought she'd made it. Her hand rested lightly on Gregson's arm, and she laughed too loudly at something he whispered. For a moment, I wondered if she'd spotted me, but she didn't even glance my way. Maybe I was invisible to her now, a reminder she'd buried under the comfort of luxury. Dinner began. The lights dimmed. Waiters moved in rhythm, placing plates with precision. Caroline gave the opening speech, standard praise about community, integrity, and family. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the edges sharpening underneath. Then she said something that made the room still. This year, she said, we honor not just success, but loyalty, the kind that endures even when family forgets its meaning. The projector behind her flickered to life. At first, it showed typical images, company milestones, construction sites, smiling employees. Then the next slide appeared. It was a hotel invoice. At first, no one seemed to notice. But then the next image came up, another invoice. Then a photo of Gregson's villa. Then a security still of him and Marina on the terrace, laughing with wine glasses in hand. A murmur rippled through the audience. Caroline didn't move. She just kept speaking, calmly describing the cost of betrayal, her tone measured, almost soothing. The next slide showed text messages. Short, intimate ones. Phrases like, "I miss you already," and "next weekend again," were projected 30 feet tall. Gregson's name was clearly visible at the top. The entire ballroom froze. Forks stopped midair. The investors at the front table stared at each other in disbelief. One woman covered her mouth. Marina went pale. Gregson stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. He tried to reach the projector table, but Caroline's attorney, who had been sitting quietly near the front, blocked him. Security moved in as Caroline continued her speech, unflinching. She announced that she was filing for divorce effective immediately, and that her lawyers had already begun transferring half of Gregson's assets into her name as outlined in their prenuptial agreement. The company's board members, who had been present as donors, were officially notified of a pending investigation into Gregson's financial misconduct. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then whispers filled the air, sharp and merciless. Gregson's name spread like static. Marina stood frozen beside him, her face drained of color, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I watched it unfold like a movie I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. Not with glee, more like grim understanding. Every choice, every lie, every smug smile had led to this stage. Gregson turned toward Marina, hissed something under his breath, then stormed out through the side doors, flashes from cameras following him. She didn't move for a while. Then she stumbled after him, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Caroline remained calm, thanked the audience for their continued support of transparency and accountability, and ended her speech with a standing ovation, though the applause wasn't for charity anymore. Afterward, she walked past me as if I were just another guest. But as she passed, she slipped a folded napkin into my hand. I didn't open it until I was outside. It said only, "Justice isn't revenge. It's order restored." That line stuck with me. By the next morning, news had spread across every business forum and gossip outlet in the city. CEO's affair exposed at charity gala. Headlines called it a corporate implosion, a scandal in designer heels. Gregson was suspended indefinitely pending an audit. The company's shares dropped overnight. Marina didn't go to work again. Her name vanished from the company site within days. I imagined she was hiding somewhere, hoping it would all blow over. But Caroline's precision had made sure there was no escaping it. Every financial record tied to Gregson and Marina had been traced. Every receipt, every expense, every weekend getaway. It all became public record through the board's investigation. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small photo, one of Marina and me from years ago, back when things still felt real. On the back, in her handwriting, were 3 words, "I lost everything." I didn't reply. That night, I sat in the same living room where I'd once waited for her to come home from work, staring at the empty space that used to hold our picture frame. I felt a strange mix of pity and peace. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just release. I thought about Caroline again, how controlled she'd been through all of it. She'd destroyed 2 people without raising her voice. Not out of rage, but to correct the imbalance they'd created. She didn't just expose an affair, she dismantled an empire built on deceit. And for the first time since that night at the villa, I slept soundly. When I woke the next morning, a notification blinked on my phone, a news update. Gregson Vale had officially resigned, citing personal reasons. The board appointed Caroline as interim CEO. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman everyone had underestimated now controlled everything her husband had tried to keep from her. And Marina, who'd once bragged that she'd secured her future, had become a footnote in someone else's victory. I poured myself a coffee and stared out the window. The city looked the same, but something in me had shifted permanently. I'd seen what quiet power looked like, the kind that doesn't scream or destroy impulsively, but dismantles piece by piece until there's nothing left to fight over. For a long time, I thought betrayal was something you survived, but now I understood it differently. It's something you outlast. And though I didn't know it yet, this wasn't the last I'd hear from Marina. The fallout had only begun. The story didn't end with the gala. Scandals like that don't just vanish. They rot slowly, pulling down everything connected to them. For weeks, the city buzzed with whispers. The Vale Corporation's name was dragged through every headline. Gregson's reputation shredded, Marina's erased completely. But I kept out of it. My part was finished, or so I thought. 3 weeks after the gala, I was leaving my office late when I saw someone waiting near my car. It took me a few seconds to recognize her. Marina. Her hair had been chopped short, unevenly, like she'd done it herself. The confident way she used to stand was gone. She looked smaller, quieter. She wasn't dressed for manipulation anymore, just jeans, a gray hoodie, and the same expression she wore the night I found her at the villa. She didn't say my name at first. She just asked if we could talk somewhere private. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat in the car, windows rolled up, rain tapping the windshield. She told me she'd been fired after the gala. HR had called it breach of ethics. Gregson had disappeared, probably trying to keep what was left of his money from his wife's lawyers. Marina said she'd been blacklisted from every major firm in the city. No one wanted to hire someone who'd publicly embarrassed their CEO. For a while, I just listened. There was something painfully human about seeing her stripped of all the arrogance that once filled her. She admitted that she'd known Gregson's marriage was falling apart, that he'd promised her a new position, even a chance to move abroad once things settled down. When Caroline found out, everything collapsed overnight. Gregson had told her to lay low and then vanished. She started crying then, quiet, restrained tears that didn't ask for sympathy, just a place to land. I asked what she wanted from me. She said she didn't know. Maybe to apologize, she murmured. But the words came out too softly, too late. I told her I didn't hate her. I meant it. Hate takes energy, and I'd run out of that a long time ago. What I felt now was just distance, a kind of emptiness that didn't ache anymore. She nodded like she understood, though I doubt she really did. When I got home that night, I opened the drawer where her old things still sat. A few photos, a keychain, and a card she'd written back when she got her promotion. "You're the reason I believe in good people," it said. I dropped it in the trash. Life settled into something resembling normal. I went to work, met with new clients, even started running in the mornings again. Every so often, I'd hear something new about the Valles. Caroline had taken full control of the company, quietly restructuring everything. People admired her for how calmly she handled the fallout. Some called it ruthless. I called it justice. Then, one afternoon, I got an email from a reporter asking if I was willing to comment on the financial irregularities linked to the Vail scandal. I had no idea what he meant. I hadn't spoken publicly about any of it. But that night, I read the article. Gregson wasn't just being investigated for adultery or company misconduct. He was being accused of embezzlement. Millions in missing client funds. Forged documents. False invoices. And the worst part? Marina's name was tied to several of them. Apparently, Gregson had used her access as his assistant to sign off on transfers and expense reports. She'd approved them all, thinking they were legitimate business costs. The investigators found her digital signature on every questionable file. Within days, she was subpoenaed as a witness, and then as a suspect. I didn't contact her, but a week later, she contacted me. Another note slipped under my door, no name on the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a sentence scribbled across it. He said he'd take care of it. I didn't know. That was the last I ever heard from her. 2 months later, the trial began. I followed the updates quietly, reading every detail in the papers. Gregson was charged with fraud and obstruction. His wife's testimony sealed his fate. Caroline presented every document, every bank record, every instance of his manipulation. She didn't look vengeful in the photos, just resolved. Marina appeared in court too. The articles described her as emotionally distraught, but cooperative. She testified that Gregson had directed her to move funds without question, convincing her they were internal reimbursements. The prosecution argued she'd benefited personally. The defense tried to paint her as naive. Neither story fully convinced anyone. In the end, Gregson got a prison sentence. Marina didn't. She avoided charges by handing over everything she knew and agreeing to testify again if needed. But the damage was done. Her reputation was unrecoverable. No company would touch her name again. A few months later, Caroline Vail's firm expanded. Investors flooded in, seeing her as a symbol of control and intelligence. And somewhere in the middle of that corporate chaos, I quietly built something of my own. I'd been saving money for years. Money meant for a wedding that never happened, a honeymoon that never existed, and a life that had dissolved before it began. I used it to start a small contracting business. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Word spread fast, and soon I was managing renovation projects around the same city where the Valles empire had crumbled. One afternoon, I got a call from a new potential client. When I saw the number, I froze. It was Caroline's assistant. She wanted to meet about a property expansion. We met at one of her offices. She was the same as always, poised, unshaken, precise. She congratulated me on the business and said she'd been following my progress. It was strange, hearing that from her. She told me she admired how I'd handled everything. Most people would have tried to destroy them, she said. You just stepped aside and let truth do the work. We talked for almost an hour about contracts, funding, and plans for a new office wing she wanted built. When I left her office, she shook my hand firmly and said, "It's good to see honesty make a comeback in this industry." That night, driving home, I realized that was the real ending. Not the gala, not the trial, not the revenge. The ending was standing in front of the same kind of power that had once destroyed me, and walking away clean. Months passed, and sometimes, when I drove near the coast, I'd catch a glimpse of Gregson's old villa, now abandoned and for sale. The glass walls were still there, the view unchanged, but the place looked hollow, like it had lost whatever illusion of luxury once made it special. Marina's car had been repossessed, her apartment sold. No one knew where she'd gone. Some said she moved back with family up north, others that she left the country. I never tried to find out. Every betrayal leaves a ghost behind, a version of yourself that still looks for answers you'll never get. But one morning, as I opened the windows of my new office and watched the light spill in, I realized the ghost had finally gone quiet. It didn't end in fireworks or grand closure. It ended in silence, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. And for the first time since the night she opened that door in a towel, I felt free.